Over the long history of video games, there have been lots of examples of ports, essentially taking a video game and either trying to retrofit it to different hardware or modifying the original contents to work on a platform that it wasn't natively made for. And in Call of Duty's case, we've had a lot of ports, but perhaps the most obvious and infamous example is Black Ops 3, what was a very innovative and boundary-pushing game for the time and for the new generation of hardware that it was made for, taking full advantage of the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One hardware. The main game was received very well by fans and was one of the most carefully crafted games by Treyarch ultimately, but as many of you know, the last generation port of Black Ops 3 is one of the worst. It is an exceptionally watered down, lackluster, and reduced version of the main game on the PS3 and Xbox 360. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even made by Treyarch. Rather, last gen BO3 was made by a studio called Beanox, and I made an entire video diving into the secrets of that terrible port if you're interested. But today, what I'm interested in getting into is the other last-gen port of a Treyarch game that is far less talked about. A game that has the same sort of reductions and deviations from the main game in a lot of ways that might actually surprise you. It's a game that has been largely forgotten by time and is never really considered to be in the main lineup of Call of Duty games. You may be familiar with the iconic Call of Duty World at War, but you may be less familiar with its other version, Call of Duty World at War Final Fronts.
My bullet points for Call of Duty World at War: gotta play the tanks, gotta check out the new party privacy systems, be sure you check out the new spawning system that we put in, enjoy the new perks, love the new tanks, and play war.
Now, despite having pretty much identical branding to the main game, minus the extra logo on the front that says Final Fronts, the cover art, for the most part, is basically the exact same as the full World at War game. And just looking at the cover, your initial impression, you would probably assume that it's just a slightly downgraded version of the full game that's on the PS3 and 360, right? But if you assumed that, you couldn't be more wrong, as in truth, World at War Final Fronts is miles apart from the real game, tonally, visually, and so much of its gameplay as well. As I had mentioned that last-gen Black Ops 3 was a Beanox project, similarly here, World at War Final Fronts was not developed by Treyarch at all, instead by a UK-based game development studio called Rebellion, who prior to this title worked on a handful of smaller games at the time. Interestingly, Rebellion Studios is still active to this day. They're making modern games, and they've made games for longer than I've been alive, but this was their first attempt at an actual Call of Duty game, and Activision was still trying to figure out this whole port concept. And with that, unfortunately, are bound to be a few bumps in the road. Activision, in order to speed up the process and reach of the massively booming Call of Duty IP brand, they felt it was crucial to still make this year's title available on the last generation of PlayStation, the PS2, which was on its way out with the PS3 becoming much more available and popular by the day. It seems Activision outsourced what would be the last generation version of World at War to this smaller studio not affiliated with Treyarch, expecting the products not to be identical exactly, but I can imagine they wanted them to be similar in nature to justify its existence. But they couldn't be more wrong when the final game would be made.
As long as you live, the heart of this army can never be broken.
Things will change, my friend. As heroes, we will return to Russia's embrace.
Tell you boys, the Japanese want this mountain so bad, they can have it, okay? It's just a whole mess of stinking jungle and son of a bugs.
What I find really interesting about Final Fronts is that it's basically the inverse situation to last-gen Black Ops 3. That game has watered-down versions of most of the zombies experience. It actually doesn't have all of the DLC, and the multiplayer, it's pretty much all intact content and direction-wise, but of course, all of it is lacking in the visual quality department and mechanical polish. BO3 last-gen was famously missing its entire campaign. Now, they did try it. Beanox attempted to get the single player to work, but under Jason Blundell's call and just all of the technical problems, it was ultimately canceled. So it's a multiplayer and zombies only game. That's literally how it's advertised. Whereas World at War Final Fronts is only campaign. It actually has no online functionality, period, so no multiplayer, and also no zombies mode either. In fairness, World at War Zombies was Treyarch's best kept secret at that time, and even if Rebellion could technically do it, I somehow doubt that this other third-party studio in a different country would know that Treyarch is tacking on this small little Easter egg at the end of the single-player campaign. So I can't exactly be surprised or blame them for not having this inclusion, but I'd be lying if I said that it means that another core piece of World at War's identity would be gone as a result. This means this version, Final Fronts, is only the campaign, and that would be fine, right? Because that was still kind of the main selling point, and the main game's single-player experience is perhaps a little bit dated by today's standards, but I feel most people still think that World at War's campaign is really good, very well made, and just exceptional all around. Treyarch leaned into the most gritty, realistic, authentic, and captivating experience that they could reasonably make while honoring the history of World War II and showing many sides of the global conflict. It featured 3 sides of the battles that had all of their own mini narrative shown in arcs. You would play as the US military in the Japanese battles in the Pacific areas. You also played as the British forces and the, airborne units that's in a totally different part of the world than the US. And last but not least, a Russian campaign featuring some of the most what would become iconic COD missions we've ever had. And of course, that also means the homie Viktor Reznov as well. Now, the inclusion of the Soviet campaign with the main package managed to strike all different kinds of themes and evoke different feelings with each side of the war. Like, not only is it interested and packed from a gameplay perspective, but tonally, it's also very whole feeling. You get the entire gradient of emotions, everything from revenge to sadness. Like, you get everything in this campaign by the end. It honors World War II, and it doesn't leave the door open for ambiguity. There's no post-credit, like, Marvel cutscenes that are setting up sequels. It's like, that's how the campaign ends, and that's the experience. World at War, the real game that is, the single-player campaign is an absolute masterpiece. Despite it being nearly 20 years old now, it can be played and enjoyed all the same as we had it back in the day for the most part. And it would be one thing if the Final Fronts campaign was just a visually downgraded experience, but retaining all of the core elements and structure. But the interesting thing is, though, is that Final Fronts does not have the same campaign, like, at all.
I say we just give him Miller. That'll make him surrender for sure.
Polanski, one more crack from you and... Look, someone's going for that bunker!
Guy's gotta be out of his mind. Who the hell is he?
Whoever he is, he needs covering fire. Get on him! Damn it!
I mean, even right from the main menu, the game's tones are different. Despite slightly similar visuals, the main themes are not the same, and now you don't have that haunting energy of the real main menu music at all. You could say that they were going for a slightly more somber and atmospheric approach compared to stuff like Call of Duty 2 or even 3, but the main menu is just not quite the same. Meanwhile, the first mission of each respective game displays that as well. The real game opens up with the Private Miller escape on the Japanese beach capture scene, a real feeling, intense, and visceral opening that immediately sets the tone for the rest of the game. Final Front's opening mission to set the tone is, let's just say it's not quite the same.
Hey, Mac, what's the scuttlebutt on the new honcho?
I hear the bastard's tough as nails.
Great, another AJ squared away.
Stow it, here he comes.
Having just your normal standard training course intro, I feel really hurts the tone of the game when the real World at War went to painstaking depths to immediately establish a unique feel. This is just a really by-the-books cookie-cutter training course mission, but also, Final Fronts does not even really feel like Call of Duty, and that's because it's on the Ashura engine instead of the ID3 engine that Treyarch was building on at that time. So really, you have a third-party studio making a game on old hardware which only loosely follows the single-player story and progression in there, and it's completely missing the Russian side of the campaign, so it features only the US and British airborne squad, and it's not even a one-to-one level recreation and plugging in the same cutscenes that Treyarch uses. Rebellion, it seems, had a very basic outline of what Treyarch was doing, but then Rebellion decided to color in the lines themselves, leading to completely different cutscenes, missions, intros, and even in-game characters. Final Fronts would become known for its generationally ass soldier AI. The reports from players about it were, at the time, described as, I quote, brain dead, soldiers completely walking into, avoiding, or not responding properly to enemies and gunfire. And after playing it again myself for this video, I can't help but agree. Also, myself and I'm sure many of us played Final Fronts when we were younger, right? I was 10 years old when Final Fronts first came out, and it's worth mentioning that many of us were probably too young to truly appreciate or critique its flaws and shortcomings. Like, of course, I had fun playing Final Fronts with my friend who had it when I was a kid, but now that I've fully developed my prefrontal cortex, or at least I would hope so, I can clearly see how it misses the mark when comparing it to the real game. As far as I can tell, it's not really clear why the Russian campaign was not included at all in Final Fronts. Most likely it's a combination of technical, time, and budget constraints, but I honestly think the Russian campaign inclusion is the heart of what separated World at War from Call of Duty and the, original more World War II oriented games beforehand. I mean, it's still responsible for the most iconic characters and imagery in a lot of ways, and without any of this in Final Fronts, frankly, it leads to feeling like a cheap, downgraded version of Call of Duty 3. And not to mention, when played straight through, the Final Fronts campaign is just a little over 3 hours long, when the real game's campaign is pushing more like 6 or 7. We can actually use the Wayback Machine to see the original listing pages for this game being priced at a healthy $40 for no online, no zombies, and a 3-hour campaign. I mean, people responded as such. It was not really received well by the player base, even for the time. It was just looked at as a cheap, downgraded version of not only the real game, but even like prior Call of Duty titles. In terms of actual gameplay terms, yeah, the gunplay is rough and it doesn't feel like COD, although I will say that the actual level structure and the way that the missions are laid out is not too bad. I mean, you can tell that this is a studio that has worked on FPS titles before, because it wasn't necessarily like an amateur studio making a first-person shooter game for the first time. Clearly, the fundamentals are there, and I mean, they even have the same big selling point that the flamethrower is, a playable weapon in this game. That's one of the biggest reasons to buy it, so you can use the flamethrower. I mean, obviously the real World at War did that, but I don't think they really leaned on that too heavily as like the only reason to purchase this game. But it is kind of shocking how little Final Fronts has to offer when you look at it as a $40 game that's not even like technically a Treyarch game. Now, it's worth noting that both of the American sides of the campaign in both the real game and Final Fronts end the same way in the same location in the Shuri Castle mission. But again, it's not like they just took the level and recreated it one for one. I actually will say this, I think I prefer the Final Fronts version of this level more than the main game, and I can't believe I'm saying that. Like, in the main game, they treat Shuri Castle like that is the end of the war. As soon as they take that, it's like curtains, right? It's game over. But in Final Fronts, the characters respond a bit differently, to where taking Shuri Castle is a victory and, to be celebrated, but it's only just the beginning. It's a bit less grand of a finale, obviously, but it does seem a little bit more authentic and accurate and just a bit more grounded. And not to mention, World at War's, essential style was that they were using a lot of real World War II footage. And with Call of Duty and how it's made now, it has to go through so many layers of approval. That's why, like, if you've played the Cold War campaign, all of the real footage they use in that is like, it's nice to see and it's authentic, but it isn't quite as raw as the stuff that you would see in Black Ops 1 or definitely World at War. And for the pre-mission cutscenes, I figured that Final Fronts would just be using the same stock stock footage that Treyarch was using for the real game, but that's not true at all. Final Fronts just uses its own historical footage, which is really cool to see. I imagine at the time this was made, they probably had a lot less corporate oversight about what kind of footage they can and can't use, so they probably had free reign just to throw whatever kind of historical clips they wanted to in between missions, but it was nice because you actually got like a different cutscene experience than you do playing the real game. The tone is obviously not quite as gritty or visceral or authentic feeling, and it can come off as really goofy and a bit silly in some cases. I can't honestly say that Final Fronts is a very good game. Even now, it's not like it's aged into some kind of secret underrated masterpiece. On the contrary, Final Fronts is one of the more forgotten entries in Call of Duty that has largely been lost to time and significantly outshined by the real World at War game. You know, I would have loved to see them try a zombies mode in this. Seeing Nocturne Toten on this engine and this console would actually go so hard, but that probably wasn't even an option for the reasons we've already discussed. I don't view Final Fronts as a good game, you know, because let's be honest, it really isn't, and what it offers for $40 at the time, it was even kind of a stretch back in games for 2007 and 2008. I just see World at War Final Fronts as more of a fascinating artifact of time, a time where Call of Duty was trying its best to maintain its growth and popularity among console gamers and taking this IP that was exploding across the world and keeping that momentum, a time where Activision trusted a random third-party studio to loosely follow what the main game was doing, but also not really. I think it just goes to show how special Treyarch was becoming at the time, as despite the same ideas on paper, to be so tonally at odds with the real game can only mean that they didn't really quite understand what World at War's scope and vision was all about. Final Front's levels are much less polished and they don't have the same, you know, well-crafted in-game cinematic moments or even the largest weapon selection. It's basically if you made World at War without Treyarch's heart in it. Curiously, on the back of the box it says, Call of Duty World at War Final Fronts offers a companion piece experience to World at War, featuring its own unique set of missions, engagements, and challenges, which leads me to think that you can look at this game in one of two ways, either as a cheap last-gen port of a game made by a third-party studio that doesn't really feel like Call of Duty, or as an extension, a DLC that looks worse, plays a little worse, and that you have to go back to last gen for. I think truly one of the biggest problems is actually the branding and how closely it wants to be associated with the real World at War. And I even remember being a kid, I was getting into zombies. I had played the real World at War game at my cousin's house, and then I went to another friend's house and he had Final Fronts, and I was like, dude, let me show you this. We need to beat the campaign and you're gonna see something crazy. We beat the campaign and then nothing happened. Like, as a kid, I didn't understand that the games were gonna be so different back then, because to me they kind of looked the same, but in retrospect, obviously they couldn't be more different. It's just a fascinating moment in time that will never happen again, because Call of Duty has a lot more control about how their last-gen ports get made now, and pretty much every single main studio works on every game now, so we're never going to get just a random third party to do their best making a Call of Duty game like we got with Black Ops 3 last-gen, or like we got with Final Fronts. You may have enjoyed Final Fronts when you played it. I kind of enjoyed myself when I played this one, even though it is scuffed. It's not a very good game, but it's just a fascinating piece of history.